Welcome, Ralph.
All right, here we go, everybody. So you'll have to excuse me. I'll tell you right out front. Everybody that knows me and is taking classes from me at Training Concepts, I'm very loud, so you'll be able to hear me way in the back, and sometimes I get extremely energetic. So hopefully, whatever kind of recording is happening, I won't bounce around too much. So that's my information. If you want to hit me up on Twitter or send an email after the fact, if there's something you want, maybe the presentation's got a lot of links in here. So let me tell you about myself. Obviously, I got the little intro there, but I've been doing this training for about 10 plus years now. And so one thing I love about training is kind of transfer knowledge. Things I know might be something you don't know. So the idea is, one thing we're all in is figuring out what's the not knowns, right? And so I like to do that. I push it a lot, do a lot of classes. Now, obviously, my focus here is on information security. So usually if I'm not in the classroom doing some training, I'm, doing some pen test or vulnerability assessment or audit or something like that for a lot of the businesses in Columbia, South Carolina. So also do SharePoint, a lot of app stuff as well. Of course, you mentioned OWASP Columbia. That's one of the groups I'm co-organizer of with Frank Catucci, and also a COLASEC member, which is basically kind of a hackerspace there in Columbia, South Carolina. We focus on a wide variety of different generalistic type of security things. So, as well as certificates, so I didn't even want to list those because for me, certificates anymore, and doing this so long, is more to help anybody that takes the classes so that they can kind of further their career. That's what I'm interested in. That's the only reason other than I have to, take the certificates and the certification in general. And then, of course, gadget and technology enthusiasts. So this is what we're going to look at today. A lot of things, and some of the things, if you go to the 2 o'clock search, going to be there as well, or the 2 o'clock presentation. So you'll see some kind of bleed over here. I didn't know how the internet would be, so I planned accordingly. So I'll have a little area there. If you're connected to your laptop right now and you have a good connection, then these are things you can look up, or you can write them down and kind of check them out later. But this is what we'll be going over, right, through the session. So if you don't know, raise your hand if you have not used the internet, right? Hopefully, oh my goodness, hopefully everybody has used it. It's a great place to go to do a lot of things. So a lot of people use the internet for online marketplace. I mean, eBay, Amazon, you pick it. There's lots of uses of that. I love it too. I'll be guilty of that. It's a great place to connect with others. I have friends and or family that are dispersed and they're not all on top of each other. So the only way we can do that nowadays is the trendy thing, right? Be on Facebook or Twitter or something like that. So it's good for that kind of stuff if you use that kind of stuff, as well as things like Reddit, right? Who doesn't love Reddit? So the internet is amazing. The problem here, and as you will see probably coming up in a second, is that privacy is a large concern, or should be a large concern for everybody. So as we are dealing and interacting on a daily basis with the internet, we're giving away a lot of information, right? We're using a lot, but we're also giving away a lot. And so hopefully in this session, I'll kind of focus on some things you might want to take home with you. And what I focus on here is more practical knowledge, okay? So current threat landscape, everybody talks about threats. Unfortunate side of events is the assumed breach concept today that we have to kind of live with. And so we're constantly looking for ways to hunt for threats. We're constantly looking for ways to try to prevent threats from taking foothold into our environment. And of course, the keynote kind of bounced onto this a little bit in the beginning today. So the bad guys are winning a lot of the sad news there, but we are trying to look to change that, right? Trying to find new ways, creative solutions, better design, to be able to make sure that that's not going to be the future for us. So that's one thing, at least somewhat, to kind of go over. And then unfortunate side, as you go through this, you kind of see and say, well, as more and more people interact online, it's great and all, and then there's awesome things about it, but from a privacy perspective, you kind of see more and more of this type of threat where you're just kind of leaving all kinds of doorways open for yourself for possible attacks in the future. And so attacks from risk like identity theft, attacks like blackmail, extortion, unsolicited selling a marketplace of your information. It's all out there, and so that's the concern. So what I hope to present to you guys as we go through these slides is a way to start searching for some of this stuff online and kind of opening your eyes to some of the things and the threats that are out there, okay? So we'll start here, okay? So when you're doing a search, and what I found out through going through and trying to develop this talk is I wanted to kind of take it from a perspective of how can I apply this practically to a lot of different folks. And so some folks might be able to have different levels of interaction that they want to go through and reduce their overall privacy footprint. And so it's got everything. It's got the mom and dads and the family members down to the more technical crowd and what you can use to kind of remove yourself from the internet. So the first thing to make note of is the concept there of ego searching, right? Or vanity searching is what a lot of people call it. So ideally what vanity searching or ego searching is you searching on some of your favorite providers. Again, I listed a whole bunch of them down here for yourself, right? And try to find out what kind of information is out there about you. And so some examples of that, of course, they mention it here in the slide. You've got putting your name, right? Obvious to what that would do. And maybe it pulls back some results, but maybe it's too broad in the scope of the results that you get. So then you start to incorporate, well, phone numbers, you start to incorporate physical addresses and some of those types of things. So one of the big things that we do a lot in pen testing, from a reconnaissance perspective, we want to be able to do like Google hacking, right? But we want to do it and apply it in this regard to ourselves, right? To see how much information is out there and what an attacker could probably use to maybe potentially get a foothold into that information or that company or whatever it is. So that's a key thing to make. Now, a note that I want to make sure that I mention as you guys go through and perform some of these activities, make sure you're not signed on to whatever the provider is. And so a lot of times you'll go to sign on to your Gmail, and then you open up YouTube and you're like, wow, it's still got me signed in. Or if you go to Google and start searching Google, it's still got you signed in. So all that stuff is being tracked constantly. So if you're, and again, I might be talking to the crowd here, you might already know this, but if you're ever going to do open source intelligence gathering, you want to make it as isolated as an environment as possible, so that that interaction point is not related or touching you, right? You want to have good OPSEC, right? And so as a way to do that, make sure you're not signed on to whatever the provider is. If you are, of course, you can, I'll show you in one of the slides, you can go, if it's Google or something like that, it keeps track of all your search history. I'll show you a link you can go to and actually clear out your search or start kind of restricting some of the access to that. Also, anybody, hands up, notice the Edward Snowden live stream this week from startpage.com? Maybe not. It was talking about election results, and it was talking about general privacy concerns with Trump becoming our new president. And so I really don't have a dog in the fight, but we'll tell you that hosting it on startpage.com is a good start. If you don't know about startpage.com, what it does is it anonymizes all your searches through Google. So if you're trying to do searches, well, use something that's going to anonymize those searches. Now, of course, here's another example, DuckDuckGo. So as opposed to going in and using some of these search providers that keep tracking everything about you, maybe start to anonymize that and use alternative sources of searching that are out there. Also, another quick thing just to kind of mention here, if you start to find yourself in the position like this has been a lot of hacks, a lot of breaches this year. One big one, of course, the MySpace concept. But you're like, well, I don't think I have a MySpace account anymore. And sure enough, maybe you did back in the day, but you didn't decide to go close that account out. So that's another thing to consider. If there are things out there that you should do some personal grooming. So being able to go to your machine and do personal grooming is the same thing as going to the internet and doing some personal grooming. And so there's a couple sites I put in my notes to make sure I mention here, namecheck.com as well as noam.com. You can go to both of those sites, put in like a username or something like that, and see if it's visible on any social networks that are out there. So just in case you got a MySpace account or you got a Flickr account or something like that, you might go to those sites and start getting more visibility into your footprint. Okay. All right. So moving forward, Josh will talk about this probably a little bit in his presentation as well. The concept of doxing. And so doxing is really an important concept because a lot of people that go after and try to use intellectual gathering or the first part of a pen test, we use that concept of kind of disclosing and finding out about personal information about employees for the organization. So here they give you kind of just some definitions to consider. Doxing, the process of retrieving, hacking, publishing other people's information, such as names, email addresses, phone numbers, and so on. And so a classic example of this is Ashley Madison, right? So with the Ashley Madison cake, $500,000 lawsuits against this organization to how they handle the overall breach. And so that's a big cause for concern. Of course, Gamergate is another example of doxing as well. So from a pen test perspective and a privacy perspective, really what I'm trying to get across here is the more information that's out there that's about you, the more exposed you are, right? So that's ideally what we want to kind of start looking at. So as well, before we get into actually doing some of the search and start looking at how do we fix all this mess, it adds to the phishing connotation. So this morning we had in the keynote the concept of phishing and what phishing is, and there's so many different types: vishing and smishing and spitting and all these different types of versions of phishing that are out there. But when it boils down to it, it is that level of trust exposure that we're trying to compromise with that individual. And so, family members or friends or relatives or even colleagues, everybody's going to get a phish. And so we'll look at how to address some of that stuff a little bit later. But if you know sites like HoaxSlayer, right, that you can kind of point them to give them an idea of, is it a spam or is it a scam or something like that, that's a good, useful thing. Or you can use Fish Tank. So if you've been given like a URL and you're worried about this, or, you go to a site and you're wondering if it is something that is considered a phish site, those are good things to kind of address and kind of know about. And of course, looking for where all the attacks come from. Of course, we saw in the presentation this morning, a lot of attacks are going to, our phishing campaigns are targeting the individuals here in the United States. So that's what that last link kind of goes to. So, all right. So when looking at all this, okay, what you're going to find is there's just a lot of sites out there that kind of expose some of the information that's out there about you, right, and how you post things. So some examples of this might be EchoSec, right? So if I had a little demo to show you guys, have you guys ever seen EchoSec before? It's pretty neat. They have a free version and a paid version. The free version is very throttled, very limited. However, what you can do is you can type in a geolocation address, okay, and then of that place you can kind of draw a rectangle around the area of coverage, and then you can kind of see all the social interactions that are happening around that area. Now, there are a lot of different services that are online that are like this. So Mapify is another example that's out there. So what do all these sites do? Well, they kind of track you, right? So as another kind of a silly example of that, check-in services that we use that are going to keep track of us tweeting or whatever we're doing, our social interaction, it's going to kind of keep track of that. And then that could be something that might broaden your access. And so an example of that from a privacy perspective would be if, let's say you're privacy prone, but you have somebody that is with you that is not as privacy prone. Okay, so they check into somewhere, or they say they're going on vacation, or whatever the case may be. Well, now, because you're understanding that you're friends with that person, they tag you in something, or whatever the case may be, then you can kind of use these sites to geolocate that particular person. Okay, so some of that's kind of scary. Wiggle.net, if you guys haven't ever used that site, it's a great place to kind of geolocate Wi-Fi devices. So what you're going to get, if you zoom in, you're going to get the SSID, you're going to get the MAC address of those devices that are all around you. Now, obviously, what we're trying to do there, right, is we go close there, we're trying to do some more driving or something like that, where we go up to the facility, we create a fake access point that says that name, and we just wait for the results of that, and then we pass the traffic on. And so maybe that's a bad guy's thinking of what he could use a site like this for, as well as others. So ideally, start looking at some of these to be an eye-opener of what kind of information is around me, so I can better kind of prune some of that information away. Okay? All right, so I know I didn't know what the internet access would be like here, so what I wanted to do is I'm going to take a break from the slides and show you what I would have kind of demonstrated in this particular position. Okay? So let me see if I can get this so you guys can see it well. All right, so a couple things just really quick. PhotoBucket. Right? So PhotoBucket is a service that you can use to send some of your photos off, and they can print them or whatever the case may be. Now, this is just one example, but probably a similar example would be any other service that does this same thing, right? There's an app for it on your phone. Probably when you install the application, it might ask you, can I use your camera? Can I access your online or your gallery of photos or whatever it is? Or maybe you get to the situation where you just upload the stuff, okay? So I didn't have the chance this morning to go off and pull out some things. But what I've seen with this service before in the past is I've seen people's W-2s. I've seen people taking credit card pictures front and back, seen driver's license, all kind of things that you would expect that probably shouldn't be on the internet. And how does this really happen? Well, it could happen out of neglect, right? Or out of just obvious, I don't care. Or it could be that you install an application that asks you access and it says, well, to make things more convenient, we'll start uploading your files to your account, right? So it could be something like that. That might be a concern of ours. Now, we might not choose to use that service anymore because of how it handles its business. As well as Google Dorking. So I picked out some Google Dorks to just show off here. The first one there basically is just going to look for pictures to be in the actual site. One of those actually looks at iCloud photos online. The other one looks at DCMI. So that's a usual type of format that we use for most digital photos today. So Some of the Google dorking, if you haven't used Google dorking before in your attack methodology, you should definitely look at it. There's some really good indicators of compromise. In fact, I probably threw some down here. Let me show you in this one. I'll skip it. But so like, for me, if I'm doing some recon on a particular subject organization, some of the things I would use is Google dorking for that. So here, site, LinkedIn, then specify the user, or you can go to some of these other sites like Zoom Info or Lead411 or Radius.com and put some other information in there. Now, what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for the format of the email address. I'm looking for the department that they're a part of. I'm looking for additional information, like in this case, if they're doing email, are they going to use their middle initial or not? You know, are they going to do first initial, last name? What are they going to do? And they're formatting the email so I can further, when I get to the social engineering piece of the attack, I can have that information ready for me. And so good information in Google hacking in general, looking for defaults and such, as well as these other services that I mentioned to you guys, like EchoSec and Mapify. All of these services, everything that's a public event through a meetup or Twitter or some of those types of things, even using things like TweetPath, right? You can find out if somebody is actually geolocating some of their tweets and stuff like that. That might be useful information to know, especially if you are with that person a lot or they build relationships with you and they kind of always are giving out their information. So that's a lot of the geolocation side of things. Let me jump back in here. All right, so people searching is another thing. When I went through this process, I wanted to be able to find all the various different sites that had information about me online. And gosh, when I started going over this list, it was a tremendous list. Okay, so you know, services like Spokio or PIPL, you can find a lot of information about yourself on these sites. Now, of course, the nice thing is they're kind of centralized, so they will point you in the direction to who the source is, to where that information is coming from. Okay. And then of course a little bit later we'll talk about how do you get out of that, right? So you're going to start seeing like things like this creepy stuff, like pictures of your house. You're going to start seeing how much your house cost or what you paid for it maybe. You're going to start seeing things like phone numbers, email addresses, everything that is in the recon package, right? So all of that stuff is visible, right? And to the down degree of some of this, we'll see that even things like Amazon wish lists are off the actual limits here in that regard. So there's lots of information out there on the internet about your birthdays, stuff like that. Other things, okay, I think that's about it. A lot of things there. So searching for some more, right? So when I started going through this, I was like, well, maybe I want to be able to find a particular person's phone number. I want to validate that phone number, that individual. So there's lots of services out there as well that do stuff like this. So ideally, you would just come in, have somebody's name, and you would try to discover their phone number. Some of these services actually let you discover things like cellular phone numbers, or if it's coming from a cellular carrier, some of those types of things give you previously known phone numbers of individuals. So they're great at tracking down people as well as addresses. So now you can kind of further creep a little bit more into how much information out there from my physical address is out there. Now what you'll find is you'll find that a lot of your physical address, your phone number, all that stuff is just out there on the internet. So again, a lot of cool stuff to discover there through that process. And so all of this, you start saying, gosh, this is a lot. I want to start removing some of this content. So how do I do that? Okay. So the first one's kind of obvious, right? Stop giving out your information, right? When they're at the checkout line, they don't need my email address, right? They don't need my phone number. And so consider that the first step, right? Stop giving out your information. Second step is the one that's probably maybe the hardest for some people, I guess, maybe, unless you know how to deal with it, is every place you go, you want to save 10 cents on diapers or whatever it is, you've got to have a loyalty card for that, right? So ideally, what you do with that is you handle it by doing either giving out false information, right? We'll talk about that a little bit. Or just not filling everything out, right, as far as that profile is concerned. So do not provide accurate information is an excellent way to do it. You could also do disinformation. So if in this case you want to give out some information, maybe give it in the case that it's not linked to you or linked to specifically straight your information. If you have to remember things, consider things like reversing the day and the month and the year. Some of those give a fake physical address. Also, you can use post office boxes, right? So a lot of what we do is we try to separate ourselves from direct contact. Whenever we're trying to increase our privacy, that's a way to do that. And another example for that is you could use anonymous email address. Anybody heard of sharklasers.com? So what sharklasers.com will do is it lets you create basically an anonymous email. And you can set it there right there in the web browser. So if you want to download something or something requires your email address, give them an anonymous email. And then if it requires you to actually confirm it, it'll come right there into the window where you can confirm it. So, but it's not linked to you, so it's kind of separated. from the actual direct contact. Okay. You could also use some of the email forwarding services listed here. Ideally, they're just trying to clean you up. So they're not going to be perfect, but if you're trying to reduce things like spam or you're trying to get that mailbox back to a workable state, then you could use some of the services there. Plus as well, some of these email forwarding services can basically set it to where you are proxying the request through this particular service. So what that means is kind of like Craigslist, right? So on Craigslist, it's got an email and somebody can click on that email to ask you a question. Well, it's not your real email. So it goes through a service, converts it, and then jumps back to your account. And that way, that providing that unique layer of abstraction is very useful from a privacy perspective. Okay, as well as also things like implementing some measure of anonymous calling. Right, so maybe you don't give out your real phone number. Maybe you use an isolation method of that. Maybe you give a friend's phone number, or you use some type of Wi-Fi calling service. Use something that kind of separates yourself from that physical number, right? That's huge as well. And one of the things that my colleague will probably talk about at 2 o'clock is building out an anonymous profile, right? If you're going to do that content, disinformation, you've got to have some information to give, right? So a good site to follow there would be fakenamegenerator.com, and you can kind of create yourself a unique identity. As far as rewards card go, again, the downside here is everything that you give it information-wise links back to you. And so this is really good if you can give it an anonymous email address, right? It's not linked to you, so use that. If they have to have an email address, give them a fake one, right? If they have to have a phone number, maybe give them your anonymized phone number or give them your Google Voice or something like that. Don't link it to you. Now, one of the cool things that a lot of places are now doing, of course you see it in CVS, you see it at Best Buy, you see it at Toys R Us, you can actually go in store, and if it's like a coupon, if that's the argument that I don't get my $10 off my $100 purchase, you can go in store and actually scan the card, which is again not linked to you, and then get all of those coupon codes or whatever it is. So do keep that in mind. There's a lot of opportunity here to do that concept of disinformation. Okay. So again, how do we protect ourselves, right? Keeping that motive moving forward. One of the biggest, and I could have probably put this into several slides, is you got to have a good baseline. Okay, so I took it on myself to try to give you some examples of kind of what looks like a good baseline. And if there's nothing else, there's something that you can take away from this. So the first thing is have an antivirus solution. So again, there are too many antivirus solution vendors out there doing pen testing. I've seen some of them falter a lot, and some of them do a decent job. So again, but you're better suited to have something to protect yourself than you're not, right? And it's available on all platforms. So you can use ClamAV, you can use Semantic, whatever your choice is. I will mention there's a great site out there, avcomparatives.org, that you can go to, and they do third-party wise rigorous testing on different solution providers, and they kind of rate them. So every so often, they'll give you a report on how well antivirus is doing. Okay, for operating system and application updates. So the thing I usually follow is if I'm not using an application or haven't used an application in a few weeks, it's gone. Right? There's no reason to have it on there. I love, like everybody else, there might be one thing that you have to hold on to because it does this one thing you do every 6 months. I understand that, but if nothing else, try as best you can to keep it updated. So if you guys haven't heard, there's some great sites out there like Ninite. If you're ever building PCs, a great place to go to directly access and interface with just the installs versus having to go to somewhere like Major Geeks or somewhere else that it's got all these links and you're like, well, which one do I click? There's 1,000 different links in here. So it makes it a little easier, and they even have an updater tool. So if you install Ninite and you install the packages from Ninite, you can actually keep those programs up to date. So keep them up to date best you can. Another example is your browser check from Koalas. So everybody's vulnerable to different types of browser extensions, be it JavaScript or Java Silverlight or Adobe, Flash, whatever it is. Well, you can go quickly to this site and you don't have to download anything. You just do a scan right there and see if any of your plugins or your system is out of date. So the more we can keep up to date, again, you look at the Verizon data breach report, that was a big problem for a lot of organizations is keeping up with patch management, configuration management. So using those tools to your benefit definitely goes a long way. Another consideration to make as well here, safely removing cookies, right? So the problem with cookies, local shared objects, right? So you've got them everywhere, right? It's not browser just cookies, right? You got Flash cookies, you got Silverlight cookies, you got all these various objects that are stored all around the machine. What can we do about it? Well, we can use tools like CCleaner, right, as a solution that goes through across browsers, because not everybody uses just one browser. As well as looking at some of those local shared objects and removing some of that stuff. Bleach bit if you're on Linux, right? So you can do these different options. Glare Utilities has some good options here as well as even maintenance that you can use with that particular tool. Onyx as well if you're on a Mac, right? So there's lots of different options out there to get rid of some of those cookies. Choosing a better browser, don't use Internet Explorer. I mean, obviously nobody really does except for work, right? But use something like Firefox. There's lots of good plugins out there for Firefox. It's my favorite. I used Chrome for a while, and again, I kind of go back and forth between these two guys. Kind of love-hate. But definitely with regards to these, look at some of the tracking and the providing options for control there in that regard. Okay. You can also use things like Trust No One, right? Anybody used that before? So it gives disinformation out on the browser, so when you do a search, it doesn't automatically interpret what you're searching, it just feeds it information. So if it's keeping some information, our goal with Trust No One is the concept of just providing extra noise as we go through our searching process. Firefox extensions, I just kind of picked a few out here. Ghostery is a good one to kind of keep track of what cookies are going on. Also, Disconnect is a very useful tool here. There's a feature of Disconnect that you can actually do disconnect search that will do an anonymized search right there for you. You can use Blur to blur out your credit card details and your credit card information. Of course, No Script or Privacy Badger, all of those are really good. And then, of course, I mentioned to you guys, I would take you guys to that part where you can track what Google is tracking on you. Okay, really quick, just to show you guys what I would demo if I had some more time. There's some extra stuff in here. So get a VPN service, right? So there's tons of them out there. I just listed a couple of them: IPVanish, Private Internet Access, ProXPN, TorGuard, Tiger VPN. A lot of it is. Use HTTPS everywhere. So if you ever know what the man-in-the-middle attack does, or if you use, I was going to think of SSL strip, it's going to strip away that HTTPS connection, try to make it HTTP. So we want to make sure that we're using, if there is a version of HTTPS out there, we're using that right version, right, of the page. A full disk encryption, can't say enough about that. Of course, with the Mac, you've got FileVault, Windows, you've got BitLocker, but then there's other options out there for containers using something like Veracrypt. So you can use something like that as another solution for protecting that host-based machine. Additional plugins. Web of Trust used to mention, now nobody mentions it, right? Got pulled out of the Firefox browser plugin section because of the way that they were handling privacy practices. And that's the problem, right? You got all these cool things that focus on privacy. Look at AdBlock Plus, right? Now they're starting to sell off to the highest bidder, right? So you got to find measures of change, right? That's what's going to happen in security in general. So using uBlock or uBlock Unity is a better option than something like AdBlock Plus. Now, go ahead.
uBlock Origin is what you
Sure, there we go. Right, exactly right.
Origin?
Yes, yes.
uBlock.
Go ahead.
uBlock and uBlock Origin are forks.
Sure.
And the original uBlock is now being sold off, so you want to use the Origin.
Yeah, definitely use Origin. I'm sorry. For Facebook activity, again, just go look at what you've got here as an option. Just it's convoluted because you've got to go all these levels deep to be able to find where you clear it out, how you control some of the settings. And that's why a typical user is probably not going to do that, right? They're not going to go the extra mile that it takes to go through all those little layers that it takes to get some of this stuff out. We'll talk about ways to address that in a second. Also, one thing that just annoys the snot on me, if you're in web applications, you know what kind of stuff you're sending out to the application server that can identify you. So as a way to kind of take that away a little bit and not help them to identify what internet browser you're using and what operating system you're using, you can use something like the user agent switcher, right? To kind of tell them you're in some version of Linux when it's not Linux or something, you're using something else, right? Disinformation is the best way to go. And I mentioned Track Me Not. There's obviously some privacy filters here. A lot of that stuff's going around. Anybody see the Black Mirror Season 3 on Netflix right now? There's a super creepy episode there, which is the third episode of Season 3. And it deals with, obviously, the ability to kind of turn on the webcam, turn on the camera, and some of those types of things. And now, with nowadays, malware is not just as simple as looking for the light anymore. Okay, so some of those types of things there. Oversight is a pretty cool tool if you haven't used it before. If it's on a Mac and it tries to access your camera or turn on your internal microphone, it'll pop up a message, which is pretty neat, right? It's active kind of host detection. A little snitch if you're on Mac. Great firewall if you're on Windows, so something maybe like Zone Alarm. Again, the Windows firewall is decent. You can add a lot of rules in there, but you need a firewall to protect you. And then LastPass, right, is in here as well. Just having some type of password manager is a great way to fix the problem with reuse of passwords, right? I don't care what version to use. Just use something because something's better than nothing, right? Okay. You have a question? I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to ask you, strawberry or lemon?
Strawberry. Sure. Thanks. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, very good. I know I'm going to respect your time, and we'll keep going here. So Windows 10 is a mess, right? Everybody agree that?
Yes.
Right? So with privacy, and again, I hope nobody works for Microsoft. Sorry. Anyway, so Windows 10 is a lot, and I just put as much as I could on this one slide because there's so many areas of interaction that Microsoft sends out, right? It just keeps, invasiveness, right? So things like location tracking, feedback you want to give Microsoft, Wi-Fi sync. Who thought that was a good idea, right? And so those types of things I just can't understand. Cortana listens to you all the time, right? So, turning stuff like that off. Again, there's a really cool tool I'll mention here, O&O Shut Up 10. Now, again, I can't condone this tool because, again, I haven't looked at it far enough, but it is a tool that kind of does all of this stuff for you, right? So if you don't want to hassle with going through all the different settings changes, if you want a simpler version just kind of as a bar to slide over to turn on each one or turn off each of these things, you can do something like that, okay? Even, it's just crazy. And this has moved a lot of people onto different platforms because of the mess that Windows 10 has kind of caused. So what are some other things that we can do? So don't forget to sign out. That's a big one, obvious one. I wanted it to be more practical for moms and pops as well. So again, teaching as long as I have, I've seen students that they'll log on with their Gmail account and maybe just walk out and not remember to sign out, something like that. Or they'll leave their desk just to run down to the restroom or go get a drink or something like that and not lock it out. So those are simple type of things that you can do even at home, right? As it becomes habit, it just becomes habit. So do that. Turn off devices not in use. And so that's a good one. Anyway, same thing with the internet. I mean, in general, that's a good practice to follow. Secure file deletion, right? So by default, everybody should know Windows does not, when you remove it from the recycle bin, does not get rid of everything, right? So you got tools like Recovery that you could run and see if you can recover some of that stuff that's been removed. So definitely find a good way to get rid of stuff. Revo uninstall, anybody fans of that? I love that tool. So if something's bedded in the registry real good or you can't find out exactly how to get rid of something, it's a real good tool for uninstallation. As well as decrapify, right? You get these laptops today, they come with all these fancy trialware, bloatware, whatever you want to call it. So using tools like that to kind of remove some of that stuff's good. One thing I thought about that as I go passing through this, anybody like portable apps? Right? They're amazing. So you can run portable apps, just walk wherever you are. That way you don't have to install the application right there on the computer. And you can even do certain types of application virtualization, put those on there as well. And that way, again, same thing. You just plug it in and you don't have to actually install it onto the actual disk. Unchecking for default installs, right? How many times have you installed something and it's tried to install either changing your browser settings or changing your search provider, installing some more crapware, whatever it is. So using something like unchecking to do unchecking all the boxes as you do the installation. Secure drive wiping, so using things like DBAN or using something like Kill Disk, right? Those are really making sure that you don't have like a few years back with the Stanford students when they got the Xboxes from GameStop and were able to pull off the credit cards that were stored on the drive. So you want to make sure you're killing your drives, doing them appropriately, right? Any Mr. Robot fans, right? So yeah, there's lots of good stuff there you can pull off drives. Cloud services like SpiderOak. So if you are using cloud storage providers, again, the sentiment of these is that you are the product, right? Everybody knows that, should know that, and not really the customer. And so a lot of the weight that weighs heavy on a lot of people from a privacy perspective is they don't offer zero knowledge, right? In a lot of cases. So we use services like SpiderOak, and they do take a zero knowledge approach to the information that they are having. So a lot of good things there from ways to protect yourself. Again, I realize a lot of stuff, right? So then I wanted to focus on smartphone privacy. Now, I took the approach to the Fruit, right, product, Apple. Obviously, Android would have some of these same kind of settings that you would want to customize. But again, the problem with these devices today, they're making for convenience, right? And they keep adding all these new features, which are amazing. But the downside to some of those features is they can leave yourself exposed. And so what I wanted to do is just take a second here and kind of look at that now. In my notes, of course, I have a couple links to things like Apple's iOS privacy policy, which I recommend everybody read. Also, the FCC smartphone security checklist. Again, it's a good thing to follow if you're trying to make sure you're at least a baseline of what you would expect from a privacy perspective. So anyway, just looking at these, you're like, oh my gosh, Apple is amazing at tracking stuff, right? Same as Microsoft is or Windows is. So you can see here advertising, limit your ad tracking. Go through some of your phone here, and you'll see some of this stuff just turned on, just amazes me. So looking at your apps and controlling what access your apps have to things like your camera. Why does that app need access to my camera? Why does that app need access to my location all the time? Some of those types of things. I usually look to say never in most cases if I can. If it says that it will always need access and it won't let me choose to only when the app is loaded, I will say no, I'm sorry. So those types of things you have to make an account for what you're willing to sacrifice a little bit. Apps that use your microphone, apps that use your photos. I mean, just stuff that is just kind of scary, right? How about that next to last one, right? Your Wi-Fi. And that's the same thing with all devices. A lot of times if you connect somewhere, like free Wi-Fi or whatever it is, it always just connects, right? And so everybody that does pen tests knows that. And so you can use lots of different tools out there to scan for people that are looking for networks to connect to, right? And connect and such. So again, the whole cloud methodology and some of that stuff. There's also 3M privacy filters that you can apply. There's just a lot of options we can do. Now, I made 2 slides just because there's too much stuff, right? So how long does it keep your messages? Look at using secure messaging applications. Signal, Whisper, Chat Secure, CryptoCat. There's lots of solutions out there that you can use, and even for your mail. So look at using something like Proton Mail, right? So Safari, there's again a lot of things here. It does default wise from a search engine perspective, cookies perspective, blocking pop-ups is obvious. Who thought it was a good idea to store passwords, right? And so again, we don't really know how they are using that information. Of course, clear all that information out. Now, unfortunately, I ran out of room, so here's some other stuff just to kind of have at it. So the black phone's not doing as well, but I do mention it here. If we can find a way to get just a plain phone nowadays, and then kind of looking to kind of lock it down, and instead of having all this bloatware and other stuff that's added to the system, again, that's a good option, even though you'll have to pay for it a good bit with the black phone too. Turn off Siri. So one of the things here that I think is kind of silly about Siri is you can tell Siri to basically go to airplane mode. And then if you're trying to remotely connect to your device because somebody stole it, you can't get to it, right? Same thing with the control center, right? I put that probably somewhere in here as well. You can flip that control center up. Somebody who saw the commercial with the guy that couldn't get onto the phone, so he went into the control center and he started taking all the pictures. So he loaded up the whole storage of the device. So when his friend came back, he had all these photos that he had to go through and delete off the device. So it's a trick, it's funny, but it's serious in the same regard. So there's lots of things here that you can do. Auto lockout's an obvious one. Keep it up to date as much as you can. Just so many different things. All right. Let's see here. Okay, so parental controls, right? Again, judging from the crowd, I don't know how many have kids or don't have kids, or maybe you just want to kind of control your roommates, right? They do some crazy stuff after all, and maybe they're using your stuff, right, to do that crazy stuff. So you want to have a little bit of control, things like K9 web protection, or have a content filter in place. Those are good solutions to make. Again, if you can afford it and you can put it in place, having a pfSense firewall or a small box that can run pfSense, those are all good solutions as well if you can add some of that content manageability inside there. There's also, just being a dad myself, found a lot of different apps that are out there that can control screen time stuff. And even internet devices now that you can basically go and do things like pause the internet. You can set restrictions to time windows when the internet is available or not. So you can do a lot of cool things today. I definitely think those are good. And then also privacygrade.org. So there's lots of sites like privacygrade. Basically what it does is it looks at the apps that you install and it gives them a rating based off of privacy. Who doesn't want that, right? Because what we are is we're an app generation. We're always installing lots and lots of apps, and we might not know exactly what those apps do. Obviously, implementing something like OpenDNS, great content filtering mechanism, and a great book for any parent out there that's trying to get a handle of some of this stuff, what the kids do, outsmarting your kids online, right? It makes sense. So anonymized networks is another thing to consider. Oops, I think I jumped past one. Sorry, controlling spam. So there's a lot of things you can do. So for the first thing, why don't we want to click unsubscribe right here, right? I think it's maybe kind of obvious, right? But by responding to something like that to the email, you're giving that positive confirmation. And not only the rate at which you do it, as well, is an important factor to it. So a lot of times, the people that push out a lot of that spam, they don't care if you unsubscribe or not. Now, some of them, again, I understand it's a part of their policy that they have to follow that, and that might be true, but a lot of times it's not. Right? So a lot of that is extra effort that we've now gone through and confirmed ourselves. Not only confirmed ourselves, but now they can sell our information off. This is a real account, live account, and they are very interactive with this account. So again, be careful with doing stuff like that because of what it entails. Now another thing here, limit the sharing of your email address. Again, don't use your real stuff, right? As far as I'm concerned, your email address should not have something that's recognizable by somebody that is going to know your name. So Not to say that you're going to create a very crafty email address that is going to be offensive to anyone, but you want to do something that's not linked directly to you, right? Obvious. So if you have control over that, try to do some of that. And then in this case, if you do, in this case, use an email service that's not, that you pay for, right? Something that is not free, because again, like I said, back at the concept there is, if you're not paying for it, you're the product, right? And don't post your email address on websites. This is a hard one for a lot of companies, right? Anytime I do a pen test, if I'm doing recon, it's the first thing I do. I spider the site, try to find emails, right? Or go on LinkedIn, try to find emails. And so a lot of times I, as a company, if there's not policies that govern some of this, like acceptable use, there's not really a way that, in this case, we can enforce something like that from an organization perspective. So we have to consider that. From personal use, right? Just don't put your real email address out there. Things like use a disposable email. Of course, there's another site. I mentioned Shark Lasers to you guys earlier. I use that in a lot of my classes because we'll do a lot of trial softwares like Nessus or something, or not Nessus, but GFI or something like that. And we'll have the students go through and use like a fake email. So just, I mean, again, just so they can kind of try out the software. Other things there, reporting spam, don't click any of the links. Be careful with the links. You can instantly just copy a link right there from the email, go over to VirusTotal, go to the URL thing so it can scan the URL from another third party versus having to click on it, right? It's always a better practice to do something like that. Watch out for checkboxes. And of course, there are some spam filtering services you can use, kind of proxy out your mail. Anonymized networks, a lot of things here. Of course, the Tor project, I2P. The idea of using these networks, everybody thinks these networks are ooey and ugly and stuff. This is darknet, whatever it is, and everybody does illegal things on these. But a lot of times it's just privacy-prone people that might be using these networks. Now, I2P is relatively, it's not relatively new, but it's not as used as much as the Tor project, as far as I can tell. But either one of these solutions is really good. And I also want to bring your attention to privacy browsers. So Epic. Well, I don't know if White Hat has theirs anymore. It was called Aviator. Also Browser. All of those are browsers that are focused on privacy efforts. So not having to go through the effort of, in the Firefox settings, changing everything from a security perspective. Now, I like that because it's a lot more hands-on, but everybody's not going to like that. So using something like Epic Browser might be a better option for you in that case. Also use proxy lists, right? So if you've got tools that you can use like proxy chains or something else, find a good proxy list that's anonymizing your traffic, and then maybe that's an option as well. A lot of VPN sites also produce those proxy lists for free to use. So any of that type of stuff that kind of anonymizes some of your network connections, as well as operating systems. So CubeOS and Tails, both of those solutions are really good from an anonymized perspective, from a privacy perspective. So they're not going to be tracking everything, something like a Windows 10 would. A lot of good stuff with Tails. Cube's a little bit newer, I guess, in regards to that, but both of those solutions are really good. And then sandboxing, right? It's amazing application virtualization you can do for sandboxing on a Windows-based system. So if you want to have or get back a little bit more control of the applications that run in Windows, you can get that. Now, of course, Microsoft is trying to do this now with a lot of their micro-virtualization that they're doing in things like Windows 10. But again, a lot of people are very weary of Windows 10 and its virtualization. And when speaking of virtualization, that's another layer that we can add there from a protection perspective as well. So credit card information, sharing a lot of information here and controlling it. So prevent the your approved junk mail. Who doesn't get that crap, right? $30,000 loan, I just go ahead and take it to my bank, right? And so those are the types of things that concern me. So here you can go to this particular site, you're starting to get some of that mail, and you can opt out online for a small period of time, but then opt out permanently if you go ahead and do it through mail. So some of those services, get a free credit report, that's your right. And so you can do that, and all as well as you can place a fraud alert for 90 days or place a freeze. I don't know, but I think the state of South Carolina is free to do that.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So those are good options. And then get reusable credit cards, right? So you get them at Walmart or wherever. Some places let you even pay cash for these reusable credit cards. So the idea there is it's not linked directly to you. Go ahead.
There is a caveat with that. A lot of the ones that you go to Walmart, you have to sign up for, so you have to make sure that you check the back and see the thing, because you have to register with their valid driver's license, and it does that. Okay.
Good to know. Yes, absolutely. But trying those types of options are always good options to follow. Anybody heard of privacy.com? Very cool site. Again, I don't know if it's open invite or not, but basically what it does is it creates temporary credit cards for every online transaction that you make. Isn't that pretty cool? So those types of things, kind of like Blur does a little bit with your credit card, but even taking it to the next level, those are cool services that you can start to use for anonymizing yourself a little bit further. Okay. Social media. So again, this is probably a stab in the heart, so to speak, for a lot of this generation. So ideally, social media, I understand it. It's awesome, right? I use Twitter literally on a daily basis. I really do enjoy it a lot. But if it comes down to the point between yourself and privacy and looking at the concerns of some of that, how evasive these particular types of technologies and these services are is out of control. So I'm always having to go into my Facebook privacy policies and privacy settings and make sure they're not turning some new feature on, right? So that's kind of a pain in the butt, but it definitely is important. Go to the privacy settings. That's the first step. You can also go into Facebook under your settings. A lot of times people will sign on with their the apps that they download with Facebook. So that's always a bad option, right? It's a convenient option, but it's a bad option because now you're giving that particular application full certain controls over your account. So you can go into the settings under apps under Facebook, and if it's been a while since you used an app and signed on with it with Facebook, take it out of there. Block it and don't allow it to be able to interact with your Facebook account. There's also sites you can wipe out your stuff. So you can go in here and you can wipe your tweets, accountkiller.com, DeleteYourAccount.com. Both of those sites will take you to the kill your account page so you don't have to magically figure out where it is on the actual site. So all of those are very useful if you're trying to find, okay, where's MySpace? And I need to get rid of MySpace because I don't use it anymore. How do I get rid of those? Or Google Plus, maybe in this case you're not a plus.google.com fan. You can go there and try to find how to downgrade and not use that particular service anymore. Okay. Also, I suggest everybody this has been several years since this talk was, given at a Hope Conference, but Privacy is Dead, Get Over It is a good talk kind of introducing you to what kind of thought behind investigative process is now used in this social landscape that we use today. And then another thing is, depending on your level of professionalism, so like I separate all these accounts. If it's LinkedIn, if I know the person well enough, if it's a good business contact, well then yeah, I'll add them in. Same thing goes with Facebook. Usually Facebook I'm more reserved on who I allow access. But then Twitter, it's wide open, right? If you follow me, I'm going to follow you, and it's going to be back and forth between everybody. So, maybe setting up that separation, those layers, depending on the service you use, is another good thing to think about. So, we need to control ourselves. As you can see, there's lots of different things that are out here. So, let's look at that a little bit. And so, most sites today have an opt-out measure. And so I mentioned Spokio, I mentioned PIPL.com, both of those in the introduction. So when I went through the process of removing myself from the internet, your best option is find a buddy, right? So you find somebody else with the same privacy concerns as you, and then basically you see how much information they can find on you, and you find out as much information as you can on them. And then you can go in it like a teamwork kind of thing. And that's much funner that way rather than doing it yourself. It will be a process. I promise you guys, getting your privacy back is not for the faint of heart. There is a paid service that I put in my notes to make sure I mention to you guys that is by abine.com. Delete Me is the name of the service. It's $99, but again, you have to decide, is it worth that to go through that cost of you, or is it interesting? Which again, being a hacker, I love those kind of things. I like to find out as much as I can about things. I like to go through the process, right? So here's all the sites and just kind of a lot of different things here. What you'll find is that every site, PIPL.com or Spokio.com, any of these sites where they track you, sometimes they'll give where they found you from, and then you can kind of go to that site and see if they have an opt-out. So definitely look at those types of things. Again, justdelete.me is another good place to go to find where those opt-outs are located. As well as we have to be concerned about data marketers, right? So again, like I said, if you're not paying for it, you're the product, right? So ideally, one example is the value packs, right? If you get mail somewhere, you might be getting a lot of those little blue envelopes that have lots of coupons that nobody uses, right? So you want to kind of opt out of some of those types of services. And so here's some great places to go, as well as Safe Shepherd is another place. So SafeShepherd.com will allow you a proactive way to remove your personal information from the internet from these marketing databases. So again, being that more proactive person is definitely going to go a long way. As well as the telephone stuff. So if you start to see that a lot of your information, your home phone information, your relatives, your friends, all of that stuff is online and available to you, start getting, you're trying to reduce the amount of spam calls you get or people with no caller ID or something like that. You want to kind of remove that. You can do some of that here by using some of these types of services. Also things like simple stuff. You can try if you want to not be discoverable, if you have to call somebody for some reason, you can do the *67 to kind of do the no caller ID, or you can use services like Spoof My Call or Spoof Card or Bluff My Call to actually give it a fake caller ID, right? Something like that. Huh?
Or cat facts.
There you go, right? That's a good one. All right, so we're going to do this, right? We're going to get this done. I'm going to wrap it up here in perfect time for lunch or any questions. So basically the first step here, think first. Don't give out your information unless you have to. But as well as just that, also start using some of the search engines to make sure that you're going through and looking for your name, looking for your address, city, and phone number. And you can even set alerts to that, right? So whatever the alert service you like to use, start monitoring some of those types of things as they come online, right? Another example is delete everything you're not using. I don't care if it's apps, I don't care if it is online services or whatever it is, go through the process of your diligence and trim some of that stuff up, right? So that's an obvious one. Go and look at some of, if you're trying to find how to get out of something, you know, you've got the opt-out, remove, opt-out with a space, or privacy. A lot of different alternatives you could use there to try to find out how to get out of that, right? As well as use prepaid credit cards. If you can use cash, absolutely go that route. P.O. Box, misspell, or alternative names. Again, disinformation is a large process, a part of this. As well as understanding your privacy and how to control some of this. So privacyrights.org, awesome site. If you guys don't know, they also have a data breach section. That's one of the big ways I keep up on all the breaches that happen is going to privacy rights. So it's a good place to go in general. A lot of good stuff there. Another thing I thought about, I was going to demo it for you guys, is looking at how much information is actually required for some of these services. And so don't fill everything out, right? So don't give them your phone number, don't give them your birthday unless they absolutely have it. And if they have it, disinformation is your best choice there. So no phone number, no email address, no date of birth, no physical address, or ways to find anonymous or disinformation there is also going to help you in long term. Don't blindly click terms of service, right? That's a big one. There's actually a tool called Eulizer that lets you go through and look at the EULA for any things that might be something that could be a cause for concern as you're installing things like applications, and then you can make that decision more appropriately whether or not you want to allow that. All right, so perfect, right? I did it. So I'll leave this few minutes here before lunch to see if you guys have any questions.
First slide so we can get your email address.
Sure. Well, I'll give you this one better. There you go. All right, any other questions?
Is that a real email?
It is. It's, I give you my work email, so you can go after that as much as you want. All right, any other questions?
So do you have this on like a blog post or something? All these links?
I don't, but if you want, I'll tweet it out, or I'll also be available if you want to just email me directly at that email. I can send you a link to it in Dropbox. All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate you guys coming.